And we're talking about some really good films of the decades, like the 70s and 80s. What about underrated films? What about films that we saw that we feel does not get nowhere near the credit for, or even anybody mentioning those films?
You know, a lot of movies came out, especially, I remember, because, you know, we were in college in the 80s. And even in the 90s, I can remember, you know, going to the movie theater every weekend, maybe like, you know, 2 or 3 times a week sometimes, you know, and go to see a matinee, you know, between classes or something. I would do that sometimes. And I would see a lot of movies that didn't even get any kind of promotions at all.
Right.
You know, I mean, I saw Halloween. I didn't know what Halloween was when I first saw it, and it became this big, huge thing, right? But there's a movie that came out in the mid 80s, right after, I guess it came out right after Aliens, Near Dark. Remember Near Dark?
That's a very underrated, wonderful film.
Near Dark,
Yes.
Catherine Bigelow.
Yes.
And it had practically the whole cast from Aliens.
Yes, yeah. I think that was right after Aliens.
Right after Aliens,
Exactly.
right? Yeah, I think, you know, Cameron produced it, of course,
Yeah,
you know.
Bill Paxton.
Bill Paxton was amazing in that movie.
yeah.
I mean, everybody was so good. Lance Henriksen is so good in that movie.
Yeah, he even had the chick that was Velasquez
Yes,
in Aliens.
yeah. But that movie, I remember loving that film when it came out.
Right.
And it was one of those films that was simple. Yeah, the whole thing takes place in the desert.
Yeah.
It's about these like vampire cowboys, you know.
Yes.
Pretty much what they are, you know. And it's one of those films, and I put it up in a perfect film category. It's one of those films that hit on all cylinders.
Yes.
The climax was perfect. It was somewhat popular that summer. I remember it came out during the summertime, and I don't think it was huge, but it did well enough, right?
Yeah. It was like one of those good movies that got on the radar, but never popular enough where everybody was talking
Exactly.
about it.
And that's a movie you never hear about anymore.
That's a good point.
I don't, probably if you mention Near Dark to anybody that's not from our generation, you probably have no idea what you're talking about.
Maybe even our generation may not even know
Maybe
about
not,
it.
yeah.
Makes me actually want to watch it.
Yeah.
But you're right. That's a good stylized movie. Hardly ever mentioned. I'll tell you a movie that was popular at its time, but I never hear anybody talk about it, even though they did a remake, which is and also has to deal with vampires, is Fright Night.
Fright Night. Fright Night. The first Fright Night is awesome.
The first Fright Night with Chris Sarandon and Roddy McDowall. And I watched that last night, dude. It was like, I felt like I was a kid again. It was like watching that. And I remember back when Entertainment Tonight used to be a thing. And they were talking about how successful that movie was. And they were talking about that movie. It was like this little vampire movie. But what I loved about Fright Night was it took a simple premise, a very Rear Window premise, which is, hey, I have a vampire that
living next door to
me. And the stuff that the kid was, which is, he's a high school, but it looks like he's a college professor.
Right.
But it was just like he believed that he was a vampire, and then he turned out he was a vampire. But it was just the fact that it was this roller coaster ride of that the vampire and the kid were kind of one up each other.
Right.
And I kind of liked the fact that he was like, he's bringing the Peter Vincent, who's the great vampire hunter on television, to help prove that he's not a vampire. But it was just like the story where it as fun as it was, started to get creepier and creepier. And seeing practical effects, dude, it was just so fun to watch again.
And that's a movie.
And nobody talks about
that movie anymore. And that's a movie that I don't know if I was ever really scared watching that movie, but I had so much fun watching that movie.
Absolutely.
And even the scenes that you said that were creepy and kind of, you know, I never really, you were kind of on the edge of your seat because it's just good filmmaking, right?
Oh, yeah.
And sometimes this can work, right? Sometimes this happens where you know the guy's going to live. You know the hero of your movie is going to probably survive and not...
Right.
You know he's going to win out eventually.
Right.
You just don't know how.
Well, you remember...
You don't know how he's going to do it, right? But, you know, that's where the suspense comes in.
Well,
you know?
there's 2 scenes that I remember was creeping me out. One is always the alley scene where, like, Evil Ed just walks down the alley and was like, no, stick with us. And now he's going to go. Brewster and his girlfriend walks. But then there's that moment where you see the fog, and then you see the vampire just walking right to, and I'm going, dude, what the fuck? Why'd you go down the alley?
Right,
you know?
yeah.
And then there was the other one where this is when the movie really got me, was finally get Roddy McDowell walking in with Brewster, the character, Peter Vincent, and Brewster, finally goes in the house.
Right.
And then there's that moment where he's got the cross and he's holding a vampire at bay, and he's like, I think we're going to make it. And then the vampire's assistant comes and knocks him over the staircase. And then they just look at Ryan McDowell, and then he runs out of the house and stuff. And I remember going, fuck, dude, that was... And then he goes into Charlie's house.
Yeah.
And that kid vampire is in the house. I was just like, fuck. So,
which was like a young... very young Jack Nicholson, wasn't he? Kind of had that young Jack Nicholson way about it.
Well, it was almost, I felt like, I can't remember the actor's name, but it was almost like if you couldn't get Christian Slater, then get this.
You got this kid, right?
Yeah, but it was a roller coaster ride of obstacles after obstacles that these characters had to go through. But it was fun, but it was still a strong story. It was really a really good. But again, Halloween time or any other time, even when they did the remake,
hear about that
nobody ever talks about that movie.
Well. Talk about, we're talking about films that are a little bit obscure from that time. Let's talk about films that were like really popular.
Well, I mean, but the funny thing is, Fright Night at the time was
popular, right? Well, another one, of course, is probably one of the goats of all goats was E.T.
Yeah.
E.T.
Nobody talks about that.
Nobody talks about E.T. anymore. It's in our social lexicon, right? I mean, we know what E.T. is, even if you've never seen the movie.
Yeah.
You've seen the images, and you've seen
now pop culture.
Exactly.
Period.
So it's like one of those things where
$1 billion. It was the first movie that made $1 billion.
And you may not have ever seen a Marilyn Monroe movie or a Bogart movie, but you know who they are, right? And I kind of see E.T. kind of being like that. It's like I don't hear anybody talk about E.T. anymore. Yeah. I mean, everybody knows about E.T., but you never really hear people talk. You hear people talk about The Thing and Blade Runner. Two movies that came out that same year.
84.
That got slammed by the box office that nobody wanted to go see at the time.
I rewatched The Thing again.
The Thing is so fun.
How fucking cool was The Thing?
The Thing is so good.
What's great about The Thing, and this is what I think is interesting, first of all, some of the best practical effects
ever.
I got to tip my hat off to the fact that was the year of aliens. Yeah. Because you had E.T. on one hand, lovable alien, and then you had The Thing. Yeah. Obviously, E.T. made all the money.
And got the Oscar.
But The Thing didn't. But what The Thing did get is longevity, and it's the movie that every filmmaker, especially in special effects, aspire to be. Yeah. And one of the smart things that they did is by not giving The Thing a actual form, it was formless. Yeah. And one of the things as I was watching, first of all, it has one of the great openings.
Right.
The fact that it's chasing down that damn dog, the helicopter, the Norwegians are chasing down the dog. And we're just, that's one of those things where you don't understand, but you're like, what's up with them, these crazy people chasing down this poor dog? And then you realize that dog was The Thing. Yeah. And when the dog starts changing, some of the effects are so fucking out there that it only works if the actors believed it. Oh yeah. And when every actor treated they treated their job seriously, and it made it work. Because there's that one shot I'll never get over. It's the one shot where they're all tied up on the chair. And then the one thing when Kurt Russell does the thing with the blood, and it jumps, and he jumped, and then he changed. But then there's a moment where he grabs one of the other guys, The Thing, and then he kind of picks him up. It's like he swallows him whole.
He's almost like a giant Venus flytrap of some sort.
Exactly. That's the one. And you see these feet just waving like this. It's so ridiculous. It's so crazy. It's like some crazy demented puppet going crazy.
Right.
But on face value, you're like, that's just ridiculous. Yeah. But then when you look at those guys like screaming, let me out, they sell it. They sell it. Yeah. They sell it. But some of the practical effects is so fucking bad shit out there that I said to myself, but if that's something from another planet, that's probably what it would look like.
Well, there's that great line. I remember there's that one great line where the guy goes, "What is that?" He goes, "I don't know, but it's angry and pissed off."
Exactly. And then the idea too that it samples from other planets. Yeah. So what you were getting were technically another creature from another planet, And of course,
genius.
The most famous moment outside of the chest opening up with the teeth and stuff like that, and then the head falling, and sprouting legs. Yeah. And of course, you got the line, you gotta be fucking kidding me. Yeah. See, that's what's memorable. I can't tell you anything about E.T., and I saw the movie 20 years after it came out. I was not one of those people that ran out to see it. Right. I had a date, and she took me to finally see E.T., and I remember watching E.T., and I was entertained, but it was what I expected. It was like, yeah, okay. Yeah. And I never watched it again.
It's a good movie. It's a solid movie. I remember seeing that film when it first came out, and I saw it maybe one other time, and that was it. Not that I disliked it. I just,
really quickly though, but E.T. isn't an underrated film.
It's not an underrated film at all.
It's definitely one that
but just one that nobody really talks about.
But nobody does talk about it. Where, is there any more films that you can remember that is underrated?
Well, I will give a shout out to a movie that I think is probably to this day one of my favorite movies that I just got no love whatsoever, and that is Spartan.
Oh yeah.
Val Kilmer,
David Mamet,
wrote and directed. Nobody knows about this movie practically. I think you and I might be the only two people that knows about this film,
and Val Kilmer
and Val Kilmer. But Spartan was Val Kilmer. I mean, everybody talks about his role in Tombstone, which was amazing, right? I mean, just inspirational. But his role in that movie is just as good on another different level. But I mean, it's a different performance altogether. But the dialogue in that movie, David Mamet is on top form in that film.
Yes,
and I don't know why. I guess because it's a wordsmith movie. You know, it's about intrigue and kidnapping and secret agents kind of thing, which is really cool. But it's a wordsmith film.
Well, David Mamet is an acquired taste.
Yeah.
And Ed O'Neill, who's in that film, I got a chance to be on set with Ed O'Neill. Yeah. And I remember talking to him briefly. And I know he gave me a look when I said, hey, we talked for a brief. It was nice, but you can tell it was a little bit distant. Yeah. Because I said, I got to tell you, I'm a big fan. And I know he was thinking Married with Kids. Yeah. I know, or Married with Children. And I know it was going to be like, but Tony, if you could have saw his face when I said, dude, I'm a big fan of you and Spartan. The smile that went on his face. I think it was a shock of
you know that
movie? And we just talked for like 5 minutes about it. He said, where's the girl?
Yeah.
Where's the girl? I mean,
one of the best scenes ever.
Yeah. Yeah. He gives Val Kilmer a look where he's like, yeah, he was the one to spot him. But you could tell that was his jam.
Yeah.
And it was like, and I struck a chord because that was the only thing I was going to talk to him about.
Yeah. Well, that movie, I mean, for me, from beginning to end, that film, it's suspenseful. It keeps you on the edge of your seat. But just the dialogue. I mean, everybody talks about how good Tarantino is with dialogue, and he is. He's amazing with dialogue. But fucking Mamet, man.
David Mamet.
Well, fucking rock the dialogue.
Well, you know what's funny with Spartan is the fact that it does this thing where it's the story of the president's daughter has been kidnapped. Yeah. But they're keeping it on a hush and hush because they don't want the Secret Service and the FBI don't want it to get out there until they can, because they feel if it gets out there, the kidnappers don't know that they have the president's daughter. Right. Yeah. Which means that that can get her killed.
This is sex trafficking. They just thought they got a cute girl to sex traffic. They have no idea that it's actually the president's daughter.
But the way that movie moves in such a sparse way was like all back alley shit. Yeah. And it was the kind of stuff where I said, I bet that's the way it happened. Yeah. Like we look at a movie like In the Line of Fire, which I love that movie, and that's another good movie, but that's all out in the surface. Right. But what happens when secret agents and Secret Service has to do things and keep it on the download? Val Kilmer's character is that guy.
That guy, yeah.
So I mean, a
lot of David Mamet's films, like I love. What was it? Homicide.
Yeah.
Homicide's another great one. Yeah. What's the one with Gene Hackman? Where the heist is the heist?
Yes.
Yeah, with Danny DeVito.
Yeah. There's this really obscure one hardly anybody ever talks about that David Mamet did called I think it's The Untouchables.
The Untouchables.
Yeah.
Well, Red Zone is another one. Is it Red Belt? Is it Red Belt? Red Belt. I'm sorry, Red Belt. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's too bad because I mean, like you said, his his writing is sort of like an acquired taste. So his films aren't like huge budget films. They're usually done really independently. Spanish Prisoner.
Such a good one.
Oh, Spanish Prisoner is one of the great films with Steve Martin.
Yes. Playing a villain.
Yeah.
Playing a villain. And
playing a very good villain, too.
Yeah. I mean, to say his movie is underrated is almost like saying his movie's not even rated because nobody knows these movies. Yeah.
And I'd be hard pressed to see where would you even find these films? I think you might find, maybe you can find Spartan on Amazon Prime, maybe.
Yeah, I think Spartan, obviously the Untouchable, Spartan are probably, out of all that we mentioned, are probably the two more popular ones. So I'm happy. Look, I saw Spartans at the theater, so I was glad to see that. It probably only played for about a week. Yeah, so there are these movies, like his whole, we can do a whole
talk about unsung heroes, right? Yeah. So what's another film that you feel hasn't gotten any love that people should know about?
It's hard for me to say this because this is a film I'm also going to probably talk more in detail with next year because it'll be I guess its 40th anniversary. I think The Last Dragon is an underrated movie.
The Last Dragon. Right?
I love The Last Dragon.
It's a fun movie.
I
have to see that movie again.
Vanity is hot. Bruce Leroy,
amazing.
I mean, the fact that she cut together the Bruce Lee tape, you got the glow and everything.
Right.
I'm like, if this woman is trying to make out with me by cutting one of the all-time best Bruce Lee videos, I'm on board. But that's a movie that's just pure fantasy. That's like a very funny fable. And Barry Gordon, who passed away recently, he produced that movie. It's such a really fun movie. And I miss movies like that. I miss that kind of escapism, entertainment, that Shogun of Harlem. It's so out there. It's so crazy. But again, it was back when they were making those movies that it was like, black man that idolized Bruce Lee and wears geese. I'm sitting there like, that's me.
That's me, right?
That's
exactly.
me. That's the story of me. So I think that's totally underrated.
Yeah.
There was a couple more that popped in my head, and I kind of forgotten. But so
you even forgot the movies that were forgotten.
Yeah, I think some of like Mickey Rourke's movies. Think, for example, I think Angel Heart. That's another one. It's an amazing movie. Nobody talks about. That is such an underrated movie, and that was a big movie at the time. Well, I don't know if it was big money wise, but I remember everybody.
They were promoting it because it was a huge release that year, and it didn't do too well.
Exactly.
I think it was a disappointment at the box office, but that movie holds up.
That movie
so well.
Still fucks me up.
And Mickey Rourke is top of his game in that.
Oh,
film.
yeah.
Top of his game, man.
Such a sleazebag detective.
Well, another great Mickey Rourke film. There's a couple of great Mickey Rourke films
I know
that
where
nobody
you're
talks
say.
about. The Pope of Greenwich Village.
I knew it.
Him and Eric Roberts were amazing in that movie. The acting in that film is right on par with anything De Niro and Pacino was doing at the time.
Yeah.
I mean, they really rock and rolled that film. That's funny.
Right.
It's hilarious at times, but it's also, very violent and very scary. I mean, it's classic 1980s gangster type stuff.
Right.
Diner.
Nobody talks about Diner.
All-time wonderful
Barry
film.
Levinson.
Barry Levinson. Some of the best improv that you will ever see actors pull off.
Right.
In that movie, you had
Paul Reiser.
Paul Reiser was in it.
Steve Guttenberg. Yeah.
Kevin Bacon.
Yes.
Kevin Bacon was in that movie. But no, Diner is one of the all-time classics. If you just take the time to watch, and that's another movie. I'm sure it would offend people now if you watched it because it's got all these sexual overtones, and it's technically about a bunch of guys just trying to get laid.
Oh yeah,
through the whole film, right? But it's real.
Yes,
it's real.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry, but that's what guys do,
especially
young guys that are in their early 20s, late teens.
And you notice a lot of those movies were in the 80s.
The 80s, because the 80s was such.
You remember Johnny Handsome?
Johnny Handsome, Mickey Rourke. Again,
that was another one that was like the 80s would always have these like really cool bottle type movies that were never too big. They were almost like neo-noir films and stuff like that.
Well, they were just enough to be A films, but they weren't huge. Like they didn't spend a lot of money on them, so they were making a lot of them. And there's a lot of creativity back then. Of course, not every one of them was hit out of the park. I mean, there were some bombs back then. State of Grace.
That's a great
State
one.
of Grace,
that
another
was a
one.
great
Talk about great gangster films. I think that was right 1980s, 1990s.
No, that came out. That came out literally 2 weeks. I think 2 weeks after Goodfellas.
What timing, right?
I said,
I mean, any other time that would have been
the talk of the town.
But
such an underrated film.
Yeah.
State of Grace.
Gary Oldman is so fucking good in that movie.
That was the time you and I went and saw that movie. And
you had the worst hangover ever.
Yeah, because I was I drank the night before and we worked at the same bar, and then so we had our DJ meeting, and then we went from the meeting to go see State of Grace.
And all those guys did in that movie was drink.
Dude, it got to such a point. They were drinking so much that I got up and I went to the bathroom and threw up. And I did it right at the moment where Gary Oldman goes off on the guys and killed the guys at the bar, and I came back. Did I miss anything? You're like, dude, you missed everything. So I remember that one. That was good. The movie I was going to mention that I know it's. Look, I think this movie's underrated, even though I know in some certain circles it isn't. Airplane.
Airplanes.
The first Airplane was hilarious.
One of the funniest movies I've ever seen.
It's one of the funniest movies. Talk about throwing shit against the fan.
Yeah.
I mean, they threw literally shit against the fan. But I remember watching that movie and laughing my ass off. I mean, yes, I guess you can go back all the way to Blazing Saddles.
Right.
And even Young Frankenstein before you get the parody movies. But there was something about Airplane.
Yeah.
That took the disaster movie and turned it inside out.
Right.
And I love Lloyd Bridges in it. It's a bad time to give a snort
blue. Yeah.
I mean, it was just everything about that movie was outrageous.
I even like the sequels. I liked Airplane too. I mean, was that the one with Shatner?
Yeah,
yeah. Shatner was in a.
You remember he had the door with the window, what you thought was a television, like he was on television, and then it opens and he walks out. Yeah, but even look. Airplane gave us Leslie Nielsen.
Yeah.
That eventually gave us Naked Gun.
Yeah.
And
which they're remaking now with Liam Neeson. Which
I think could work.
It could work.
It could work because
in the right hands.
Well, all he's got to do is do his Taken routine, and I think that's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So okay, this is my last one, but this is the one I forgot, but I wanted to bring up, and I had to laugh at this because I remember liking this movie in the theater. But then, when you watch a movie in the theater and you think it's funny or you think it's good, but then you haven't seen it for like 20 years.
Right.
So you revisit it now kind of more skeptical, more like, all right, was it just me? Was I high when I liked this movie? Yeah. And then you find yourself laughing almost at the exact same parts that you're laughing. And that's Dragnet with Dan Aykroyd and Tom Hanks.
Jeez, talk about, now you're reaching, man, because I barely remember Dragnet. Yeah.
That movie... It's on Netflix, and I just said I played at the club at one point, and I knew something was working because I couldn't hear it, but I was reading it, and I'm starting to kind of laughing at some of the images on there, so I went and watched it again. Dragnet, which is the take of the TV show, Dragnet, is so funny.
Yeah.
Because it's just...
Now, do you think you have to have seen the original Dragnet in order to appreciate that movie?
No, because I barely watched the original Dragnet. I knew about it, but I think... knowing about it helps because of the Aykroyd's performance, right? Because he's like Joe Friday's nephew,
and he's doing the cadence and everything.
But what's kind of funny was Tom Hanks, because he's a good foil. And at that time, I was not a big Tom Hanks, fan of all the bachelor parties.
Well, that was back when they were trying to make him the next Bill Murray.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. But in that one, he actually worked.
Yeah.
He doesn't like, Friday busts in. Thank God it's Friday. I said to myself, I know this is a corny line, and I'm laughing at it. But there were just something about it that just, it was like comfort food for me.
Well, yeah, no.
It was so much fun watching it. And so, no, that's one that's very underrated. I really like that movie, and
like you said, there's a lot of movies that were popular back then, but you just don't, people don't talk about them anymore. And there's not any kind of, Rain Man was another one that I thought was awesome when it came out.
Well, I think it's funny because I think it's we go from underrated to movies that were big at the time, but then never really people talk about.
Yeah, they were sustained.
And yet Rain Man still shows from time to time.
Yeah,
Cape Fear.
Cape Fear
was our first
one
film.
of the best remakes ever, right?
Yeah. Cape Fear was the first time
we saw together
in the theater.
Yeah.
I got there 15 minutes early and you were already there.
I was already.
You were already. I should have looked and went, yeah, I'm gonna hang out with this guy for a while. But yeah, Cape Fear, come out wherever you are.
Yeah,
you know, and that's just a fun movie to watch.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you get these movies that were really big, and then nobody talks about it, and then you get the underrated films that are like the gems.
Gremlins. There's another film.
Yeah,
Gremlins.
Nobody
I
talks
never
about.
hear anybody talk about Gremlins anymore.
No.
I mean, it's another one of those films that kind of people know about. You know, people get it. Okay, you never feed them after midnight kind of thing. I mean, that's kind of but you never hear anybody actually talk about it.
I think this generation more knows about certain films because I think the certain films have hit more pop culture than actually have sat down and watched them.
Well, no, exactly. It's like when we were kids, maybe, you know.
We at least saw the film before they became pop culture. Now, we may not have gone back and rewatched them a lot, but I do think that if you mention Gremlins, somebody or some kid, oh, yeah, I heard about that, but it's usually a toy, or maybe a cartoon based off of the movie, but very few people have actually sat there and watched that movie.
I remember when I was a kid, about 5 or 6 years old, and I would watch the old Bugs Bunny cartoons.
Yeah.
And I remember Bugs Bunny mentioned Cecil B. DeMille. And I was, who? And I had no idea who Cecil B. DeMille was. But I kind of knew because of Bugs Bunny, the way he mentioned it, and he mentioned it in the context of movies. I was like, huh. And even in Blazing Saddles, when he had that great line.
I killed more men than Cecil B. DeMille.
Exactly.
Oh, that's awesome.
But you get the context, even though you may not have seen those films, or you maybe not even completely know who Cecil B. DeMille was.
Yes.
Yeah. For some reason, it translated, you know?
Well, it was the same way and Bugs Bunny did this too. I'm ready for my close-up.
Yeah.
So I was ready for my close-up, and even the Carol Burnett show was like, Max, I did not know what it was until I saw Sunset Boulevard.
Exactly.
But I knew it was from a famous film.
Yes,
I was like, so when I saw the movie, I went, oh, that's where that's from.
Right.
You know, so there was always this nice moment pop culture could sustain a certain aspect about a film, even if you hadn't seen it.
Well, even when he did Liberace.
Yes.
Here we are. We're getting on this Bugs Bunny kick, but yeah, I remember he did Liberace. And he goes, "I wish my brother George was here."
Yeah, see.
And at the time, I'm like going, "I have no idea who the hell George is, but that's funny."
Yes.
You know.
And yeah. So yeah, okay. I think we could.
What was that line before we go away? What was did that have any hidden meaning? I just wonder if this was a completely Bugs Bunny thing. But remember, in a lot of episodes, he would come out of the hole and he would look at the map and he'd look around and he goes, I knew I should have taken a left turn at Albuquerque.
That's got to be a line.
That's got to be a line from that era, right?
Yeah.
Because he did that all the time.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's kind of like buckle up. It's going to be a bumpy ride.
Exactly, yeah.
I'll get another Bugs Bunny.
Which is from...
what's a Betty Davis?
Betty Davis, I think, Eve.
Something about Eve.
Something about Eve.
Yes.
Something. Yeah.
But yeah, see, but here's the thing, though. When a show or movie is well written and you have an incredible scene with incredible lines, we don't recognize that those lines can live on, even if the movie doesn't.
Exactly.
That's what's so important.
Those moments, right?
It's those moments. I think at some point, you get lines where you go, I made him an offer he can't refuse. Yeah. We know where that's from. Yeah. I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
Yeah. Well, I think your classic films, your great movies, are movies with great moments.
And great lines.
Yeah.
Well, and I'd be curious to see. I don't know of too many great movies where I can remember lines.
In the last couple of years? That's going to be a tough one. I don't know.
We'll have to think about that. We'll have to ponder on that one.
Yeah. The bar's gone down lower. And you know what? It would be so much better to go back and watch these films than some of the new shit that comes out all the time. That's going to just waste your time. It's going to be awful. Instead of wasting your time with some of these newer films, go back and watch some classics that are kind of under the radar.